I stumbled upon these recovery houses, which are these informal, unlicensed drug and alcohol halfway houses that have proliferated in the city's poorest and most heavily blighted zones, mostly since about the early 1980s. Welfare was reformed in 1982 in Pennsylvania under pressure from Ronald Reagan. Governor Thornburg overhauled general assistance and created, there was kind of a compromise on the House floor, a category for drug addicts and alcoholics. They received $205 a month in cash assistance. That level hasn't changed since 1982. They are up to about $139 in food stamps now. So what's happened here is informal street-level entrepreneurs have started buying up cheap and degraded row houses, and they've started these kind of businesses where they're able to get 10, 12, 15 guys in one house. They collect their welfare benefits, which come on something like an ATM. They're able to just swipe this each month. So you've got $205 a head coming in. Food is paid for in a collectivized food budget. And you can see how these can become even potentially profitable if a person accumulates 10, 12, 15 houses under one program name, something like One Day at a Time. And this does actually happen in some cases where there'll be upwards of 100 bodies on welfare circulating through many different houses that are owned by one person or one partnership. So the title of the book is How It Works, Recovering Citizens in Post-Welfare Philadelphia. And the title, particularly How It Works, is meant to accommodate several reference points, but maybe more importantly, a concentric analytical approach to understanding these recovery houses. Originally, the phrase comes from the 5th chapter of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, which was written in 1939 by Bill Wilson. Still, the preamble of the 5th chapter is read at the start of almost all 12-step meetings today. But the book is really less about AA, and even addiction in its conventional sense, than about a broader relationship between these recovery houses and the city of Philadelphia and the restructuring of the city after 1970. What I mean here to accomplish with the title How It Works is to introduce and to enable a new approach to studying addiction, to studying urban poverty, and to engage in social policy analysis. The typical approach in welfare scholarship is to look at what works by measuring outcomes and something along the conventional formula of intervention X affects outcome Y. This book is really meant to work backwards, in a sense, from the micro level of how people are experiencing poverty survival up to the city, the state, and the federal level and its restructurings. So the typical kind of people that end up in recovery houses are actually, the movement has induced these kind of strange migratory patterns in the Northeast Corridor, from New York City, from Newark, New Jersey, from Baltimore, Maryland, and even most recently from Puerto Rico, where town governments and churches have started buying these one-way airline tickets for addicts to make a kind of strange sobriety pilgrimage into Kensington. And typically these are people who are destitute, they've run out of other options in their cities, they don't have access to cash assistance like general assistance, and they lack affordable housing alternatives, which these recovery houses provide. Arguably, they keep thousands of people that would otherwise be homeless off the streets by allowing them with $205 a month to move into a house that is ostensibly about providing a sober atmosphere and providing a collective food budget on this kind of self-help philosophy of AA recovery. In terms of the question of are these houses successful, do most of the people recover, I take an approach here that really tries to problematize the question of success, or at least to broaden what we mean by success. And the approach of the book, and this actually goes back to the title, How It Works, is meant to kind of at least add something on to the question of what works, which is typically taken up with the question of success in social policy and practice intervention, and look at the question of the effective workings of social failure, right? Now, I can answer that more conventionally by saying, out of about 100 guys that I knew, there really is only one today, 8 years later, who is still clean and sober. The rest of them have continued to cycle in and out of jail, to have trouble with child welfare supports, with the welfare system itself, with the behavioral health system, with probation and parole, with low-wage labor and day labor markets, even getting caught up in the kind of recidivism of the predatory self-help market of the recovery houses themselves, right? What the book really tries to assess here is the extent to which these multiple kind of backsliding stories actually explain a new kind of poverty management system, whereby these kind of failures that these on the individual level actually ultimately lead to regulatory encounters with state institutions, whether it be child support, welfare, criminal justice, right, or even workfare programs. So in that sense, the lived experience of these individuals kind of facilitates a broader restructuring here of the welfare state after 1980 in Pennsylvania. Like all kind of primitive free market phenomena, there's a range of a spectrum here of comportment, if you will, from the kind of predatory and highly exploitative forms of houses where they're overcrowded, they have substandard housing conditions, they're quite coercive in many ways, to what you might call a very virtuous brotherhood that is really organized around self-help, recovery principles, and giving back, and so on. And they actually, sometimes the guys would argue, this is second to none. This is the best form of treatment, is one addict to another on this kind of older 12-step notion. And you have everything in between those two poles here. So I think the question here is really how these houses operate, why the city allows them to continue, right? Because unlike other forms of invisible or underground economy, these houses are highly conspicuous, right? They're intimately connected to formal systems of social service delivery, right? And there's a full range of them that are allowed to continue and to persist over the last 25 years, even to burgeon in their own fashion. So there's benefits here that the government enjoys, even from this informal, unrecognized sector, that in some ways, I don't know that any public officials would say they're positive. In fact, they usually say the opposite, but they are providing benefits. Certainly the book is about the small-scale governmental restructurings of the welfare reform era. But there's a federal to state to urban to even to street level story here, right, where the federal government forces states to reform their public assistance programs. The state dumps responsibility for this onto urban municipalities, and urban municipalities typically have responded in many ways by dumping responsibility for the poor into the streets of neighborhoods, into this informal sector of self-help and civil society, right? This book, I think, presents a very complicated picture of the wide array of outcomes that comes from this kind of informal approach, right, that is also marketized, right? It has a real profit motive to it. But this is one way in which we as a citizenry have decided to provide social services to the poor.